Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Eunice Abiola, aka Eunice Abi, and today we'll be making a mono strap crop top, okay, with puff sleeves. And we'll be making use of two materials. We'll be making use of this Ankara print as well as this black chiffon fabric. The first step is to draft our basic bodice, and here is the paper I'll be using to draft my basic bodice. I'm going to go ahead now and fold this paper into two because we are drafting the full bodice. So I'm going to fold this into two and start drafting. The first thing I'm going to mark is half of my shoulder measurement. My shoulder is 15 divided by 2 is 7.5. So I'm going to go ahead now and mark 7.5. And that's it. And I'm also going to mark 3 inches for my neckline and 7.5 for the shoulder line. And if we remember, our shoulder is not straight, so I'm going to come down by 1 inch from the shoulder line. After that, I'll go ahead to connect from that neckline to the shoulder line. Okay, that forms a shoulder slope. Next is to mark the armhole line. The armhole line is gotten by dividing the bust by 6 plus 1.5. I got 7.8, but I just rounded it off to 8 inches. So I marked 8 inches and I drew a straight line at that point, after which I went ahead to measure the same 7.5 that we measured at the top so as to get a straight line at our armhole line. So I ruled that to form a straight line, and that is our armhole line. Then on the neckline, I went down by 3 inches, which is just the basic neckline, not like we need this, but just for proper understanding. After which I went ahead to mark all the horizontal measurements. My bust point is 10 inches. I marked 10 inches and I went ahead to rule that to form a straight line, after which I labeled it BP. Okay, then I went ahead to mark my waistline. My waistline is 17 inches. I marked the 17 inches and I did as before. I wrote that to form a straight line. Okay, after marking the waistline, I went ahead to label that waistline. Then I measured my top length. The top length I would want for this crop top is 18 inches. Then I labeled that top length and I added 1 inch extra allowance at the base. Okay, so that's last line that I'm ruling is the allowance line. Then on the bust line, I divided my bust, which is 38 by 4, and I got 9.5. On the waistline, I'm going to divide my waist circumference by 4. 30 divided by 4 gives me 7.5 inches, which I'll go ahead to mark on the waistline. And I'll mark the same thing that I marked on the waistline on the allowance line, and rule that to form a straight line, after which I'll connect from the waistline to the armhole line. When I'm done, I'm going to go ahead to add my allowance. The allowance I'll be working with is 1 inch. So I added 1 inch allowance on the armhole line, 1 inch on the waistline, and 1 inch on the allowance line. And I connected all of the points. Yeah. Now it's time to trim out the parts that we do not need from this pattern paper. So I remember that I have not drawn out my front and back armhole, and that's what we're going to be doing now. If you remember, the length of my armhole is 8 inches, which I'm just measuring again. I'll take half of that 8 inches, and that is 4 inches. And I'm going to connect to form my back armhole on the original bust divided by 4. That's before we added our allowance. Yeah, and that forms my back armhole. For the front armhole, I'm going to go in by 0.5 inches, connect from the shoulder slope to that point, and connect the rest to the original bust divided by 4 inches. That's before the allowance. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead to trim out that point and also trim out the shoulder slope. Yeah, and there's no need to trim out the neckline because that is not really important at this point. Okay, so I'm going to open up the basic bodies, and here's what we have. Now the next step is to measure out our mono strap. For my mono strap, I want that neck area to go in by 1 more inch. Yeah, so I marked 1 inch there, and at the midpoint. I came down by 5 inches at the midpoint because I don't want this to be too, to be too low at the chest area. I want this to be something I can wear to a lot of places. I don't want boobs showing here and there. So I'll go ahead with my free hand and connect all the points. Yeah, I just want this to be well covered. Okay, so if you want yours to go down more, just give it any shape you want. To be honest, this is just me just doing my thing freehand. So I'll go ahead now and cut that point out. Yeah, after which we're going to do slash and spread. Guys, I made a little mistake here, but I corrected it. I wasn't supposed to slash straight from the shoulder the way I slashed, but you're going to see the correction in a minute. Just watch to a few minutes before you try out this part. So after cutting slashing the shoulder area, I measured from the waistline what I had at that point, and I divided it by 3 because I wanted to divide that point by 4. Yeah, I wanted to divide that point by 4. So what I had there was 12.5. So I divided 12.5 inches by 4, which enabled me to divide this into 4 equal parts. If you can see, like I said, we have 12.5 inches, so I was able to divide that into 4 equal parts. Yeah, so when I was done, I went ahead to connect all the lines to form a straight line, after which I went in with my scissors and I slashed all the points and I labeled them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. After slashing, I went ahead to sellotape 4 and 5 back. Guys, if you slash from the shoulder, it might be a bit difficult to slash and spread, and it might affect your shoulder, the way your shoulder sits on your the way your shoulder line would sit on your shoulder. So I had to sellotape that back to avoid stressing ourselves because of that. So I'm going to come out by 1 inch from the shoulder line before I slash. Okay, that's what I should have done at the onset. So that's what I'm going to do now. Then I went ahead to slash from this my new point. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead to the fabric to show you how to cut out the fabric you need. You're going to place it right sides facing each other like this, and arrange it just to know the amount of fabric you would need, because you don't want to waste your fabric. So I kept adjusting until I got the required amount of fabric. Then I went ahead to just cut it out so that it makes it easy for me to work with this small piece of fabric. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so when I was done, I went ahead to properly slash and spread, right sides facing each other like I told you guys. And yeah, here is it. I placed everything, I made sure the lines align, because for slashing and spreading you want to make sure that everything is straight. I slashed using 1 inch space. Guys, you can use 1.5, you can use 2, you can even slash to more than 5. I just did this because this is what I wanted to make the top bigger. You can slash as much as you want. Okay, just know this is not a standard. You can slash it to about maybe 7 pieces, you can slash to 8 pieces, then you can now decide to use 1.5 in the middle, 2 inches, but this is what I want for myself. And yeah, so I went ahead to slash everything, and the space between each paper is 1 inch. As you can see, I'm trying to get everything accurately, 1 inch in between each paper. After slashing and spreading, I'm going to go ahead to make the neckline straight. It's okay if the neckline is not looking straight, just use your chalk to form a straight line at that point. Then after doing that, I'll go ahead now to cut out all the pieces, but at the top area I'm going to add a little bit of allowance because I'll be turning it with my bias tape. Okay, so I would just give it just even if it's 0.25 allowance, nothing too bad, not a lot of allowance, just to enable me have allowance to join that to the bias. Okay, as you can see, I have a little allowance. Then I will label the back. I'll flip the back to one side to enable me now trace the front armhole. I will now trace out the front armhole, because you know the armhole we traced out initially was for the back. So after shifting out the back, I would now trace out the front armhole. Okay, yeah, and yes, we've traced out both our front and our back armhole, and you can tell the difference. I'll go ahead to remove all those pins now, and we're going to go to the sleeve. Yeah, cutting out of the sleeve. Okay, so for the sleeve, I won't tell you the measurement I'll be working with. My sleeve length is 24.5. I will add 1 inch seam allowance, which gives me 25.5. Then the armhole that I'm working with is 16. 8 inches times 2 is 16. And I'm going to add 12 inches to that armhole, because this is a puff sleeve. And I'll add 2 inches for allowance, which will give me 30 inches. Okay, yeah, so the next thing now is to cut out the sleeve. The sleeve length we're working with is 25.5. Okay, so I'm going to measure out that 25.5 length first. Remember to place your sleeve on fold like I'm doing. Remember to place it on fold. Then I'll try to get 30 divided by 2. Since this is on fold, 30 divided by 2 is going to give me 15 inches. So I measured 15 inches and I cut it out. So this is just what we need for our sleeve. Okay, so if you remember, we added extra 12 inches. Okay, 12 divided by 2 is 6. So I'm going to measure from the center front. I'm going to measure 6 inches from beginning to the end. That is our extra allowance there. Then my armhole is 16. If you can remember, 16 divided by 2 is 8 inches, because the sleeve is on fold. I'm going to mark 8 inches now from beginning to the end. And if you remember, our allowance is 2 inches. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So the remaining allowance, the remaining 1 inch there, is our allowance for the sleeve. The next step is to calculate the cap height. Cap height is calculated by dividing your bust by 10 plus 1.2 inches. And what I have is 5 inches. 38 divided by 10 plus 1.2 inches is 5 inches. And I marked 5 inches from the top, and I ruled that into a straight line. Okay, then I'm going to connect from that point to this point. As you can see, after connecting, I'm going to measure what I have there, and what I had there is 9 inches. I'll use my tape rule to show you what I actually have there. I have 9 inches there. I'm going to divide that into 3, 6, 9. Okay, then at the other edge, I'm going to come out by 0.8 inches. That's exactly what I just marked. At the midpoint here, I'll come out by 0.8 inches, and I'll connect from that 0.8 inch to this 0.8 inch using my curved ruler. After connecting that, I'll go ahead and connect from that 0.8 inches to the midpoint like this. Then I'm going to divide the last 3 inches by 2, which will give me 1.5 inches, and I will go in this time around by 0.2 inches, and I'll connect with my curved ruler. And once I'm done, that forms my armhole curve. Okay, then I'm going to measure my last 1 inch allowance. I'll measure it from beginning to the end, and yes, we are done with cutting our sleeve. Okay, here's something I'll do differently next time whilst cutting the sleeve, because the sleeve didn't come out as puffy as I would have loved it to come out, and I found out the reason. At this top point where I'm pointing an arrow at, I should have gone up a little bit by probably 3 inches or 2 inches. Okay, and that would have made it a lot puffier, and you would have noticed the beauty of the sleeve. Okay, so after cutting that out, I'm going to cut out the chiffon print, on fold 15 inches, and in width it is 4 inches. Okay, so guys, now let's go ahead and start joining our top properly. For the top, I'm going to go ahead to join the shoulders using a very little allowance or 0.5 inch allowance, as the case may be. And for this chiffon fabric that I cut out, I'm going to hem both ends using about 0.5 inch allowance, just very little. It should be very small because the beauty comes out when what you use in hemming it is very little. Then I'll go ahead to mark 2 inches on the sleeve from the base of the sleeve upwards, and I'll connect that to form a straight line. This will serve as a guide and you will see why. Now the part that I have already gone ahead to hem, I will take half of the sleeve because I've gone ahead to hem both ends. Take half of the sleeve. This will serve as a guide as well. We are not stitching on it, but it will serve as a guide to create our channel for our elastic. Okay, so I'll place that at that point and I'll try to create a channel for the elastic. Okay, and I pinned down that part so that it doesn't shift or move around at all, so that my work comes out neat. Then I'm going to bring the elastic. You can bring your elastic and use it to measure how you need to stitch on both sides of the line. Okay, so or you can just mark 0.25 on each side of the line. Any one you want to do, it's fine. Just make sure you get a channel to pass your elastic through. Okay, so I'll go ahead now to my sewing machine and stitch on both sides of the line to form a channel for my elastic. And here's what I have when I was done. I've gone ahead to stitch on both sides of the line. You can't really see because I used the black thread. Okay, yeah, after that, another thing you can also do is to use your bias tape to create a channel at the back for your elastic. If you don't want to go through that route, all you have to do is to stitch in front the line we did earlier, not on both sides of the line. Just stitch so that to hold the black fabric in place, then you use your bias tape to create a channel behind. But that's not what we're going to do for this video. To get the elastic length that we'll be working with, you place it around your hand like this and you cut out what you would require. Then you go ahead and fix your elastic to the elastic channel. To fix my elastic, I'm going to pass my elastic through a safety pin. That's what I like to use to fix my elastic, and I'll go ahead to pass that through the channel. And yeah, that's basically it for the elastic. Okay, now the next step is to try to gather the top of the sleeve. Before I gather the sleeve, I'm going to go ahead to notch that extra allowance there. I'm going to notch it like this. Yeah, because that's where our gathers will be sandwiched. Then I'll go ahead with my needle and thread and gather the sleeve. I'm going to be using my needle and thread because I find that more comfortable. Whatever you find comfortable, if you prefer to go on your sewing machine to stitch a basic stitch round and then gather, just do what you feel. But I prefer to use my needle and thread to gather. And here's what I have when I was done gathering. I made sure the gathers was sandwiched in between the two notched points more, okay, because that's what's going to give us the effect that we are looking for. Even though I feel like the effect didn't come out as much as I would have loved it due to the problem I told you guys initially, and I've already told you the solution to that problem. So I'll go ahead now to attach the sleeve to the bodice. Okay, the first thing I'll do is to fold my sleeves into two in order to get the midpoint. Then I'll open up my armhole area as well. And yeah, I'm going to place, half of the sleeve on the midpoint of the armhole. Okay, before I start stitching, I'm going to start stitching from the midpoint. I'll stitch from the midpoint to the first end, then I would come back to that midpoint and stitch from the midpoint to the other end. I made sure the gathers was sandwiched in between the parts that we notched. Okay, so I'll go ahead now and stitch the sleeves. And yeah, here's what I have. From our drafting, we added 1 inch seam allowance. I'm going to go ahead to mark that 1 inch seam allowance, and I'll go to my sewing machine and stitch that 1 inch seam allowance. The next step is to go ahead and turn the neckline using a bias tape, and this bias tape is what we'll use to create a channel for our elastic. After doing that, I'll go ahead to also create a channel at the base of the top for the elastic to pass through as well. I'll create a channel that would allow 0.5-inch elastic to pass through. So I've gone ahead to do that. I've created the channel on the neckline and I've created the channel at the base of the top, and I've also finished the sleeve area using my bias tape. I didn't want to hem it. So the next thing I'm going to do is to measure the elastic required for the neckline and the waist. What I'll do is to measure the neckline. I'll measure it round, and when I was done measuring it, I realized that I had 41.5 inches. I'll go ahead and subtract 17 inches from that 41.5 inches, which will give me 24.5 inches. For the waist, my waist is 30. I'll subtract 5 inches, which will give me 25 inches. So that is the length of the elastic I'm going to use on the neckline and on the waist. I have gone ahead to pass in the elastic, and I'll go ahead to mark out the 1-inch seam allowance to close the sides. And here's what I have when I was done, guys. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on post notifications so that you'll be the first to receive any video that I post. Okay, bye for now, guys.